The Avenging Son and the Primarch of the Ultramarines seems to have got a massive glow up in the new 10th edition rules. He's harder to kill, hits much harder in combat, and still seems to be bringing a new version of those 4 rerolls to hit and wound, potentially to a huge chunk of the Space Marine army. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking about a Primarch with his new datasheet for Warhammer 40k 10th edition, and we're going to be talking in depth about what Roboute Guilliman can do on the table. Guilliman certainly had his ups and downs over 8th and 9th, being basically auto-include and one of the best things in the game early in 8th, and now currently I'd say he's pretty solid for the Ultramarines, almost auto-include for their roster, but maybe within the greater scope of Warhammer 40k, his datasheet maybe is showing its age a bit. It's one of the few rules left over from 8th edition that never got refreshed. Safe to say though that he's now back in some style, a fairly game-changing model to add to an army. For those less familiar with him, Roboute Guilliman is the Primarch of the Ultramarines, fairly central to the Warhammer 40k fluff in general. This guy was resurrected to the galaxy to find an Imperium far different from the one that he left. His assumed command is the Lord Commander, and is kind of central to the 10th edition 40k narrative as well. It's basically him against the Tyranids. Can the strategies of the Primarch hold back the tide of Leviathan before it reaches Terra? In combat he fights with the sword of the Emperor himself, plus the Hand of Dominion, and is far harder to kill than he'd normally be with the Armour of Fate, which still looks like it can resurrect him from the dead. Miniature wise, the model costs £42.50, €50 or $60 from Games Workshop directly. At least in the past, this guy's generally been a good example of decent enough points per dollar. He's usually a very expensive character, and at least compared with some other vehicles, monsters and characters in the game, Roboute Guilliman isn't actually all that expensive for a miniature of his size. Still pays a bit of character tax, but perhaps priced a little bit more acceptably than some of Games Workshop's other offerings, I'd argue. The current model is suitably ornate and has plenty of Ultramarines heraldry going for him, maybe a little bit of a generic leader pose, though I guess maybe that's not too unexpected given that they're Ultramarines, and he does have a head swap for his head or helmet. If you were thinking about picking the miniature up, Element Games in the UK has him at a slight discount, 15% off, so £36.10. Noble Knight Games also has him at a slight discount in the USA as well for $64. Both of those are links down in the video description if you were picking him up. Those links are affiliate links that help support the channel and keep these videos coming. Getting onto his new 10th edition rules though, and Games Workshop previewed these the other day. He does seem to have changed in nature a fair bit, as with quite a few characters within 10th edition, though it does look like he's probably harder to kill and does a lot more damage in combat, which is kind of nice for him. First up, let's start with a few base rules. We don't know his points cost yet, so obviously we won't be able to say exactly how strong he is until we do. I would say from these stats though that he could have a very high points cost and still be pretty good. The way that he'll work is that he's going to be a character with the Lone Operative keyword. He gains Lone Operative if he's within 3 inches of a friendly Adeptus Astartes infantry unit, and that's the rule that means that he can't be targeted unless the shooting enemy is within 12 inches of him. So basically gets to protect him against longer range enemy fire, provided he's not running around on his own. He won't be screened by vehicles and things anymore though. He will need some specifically infantry to be able to shield him. Otherwise he does have the Epic Hero keyword, which basically denotes him as a unique character. He can only have one. And something that we hadn't seen before on 40k datasheets is that he also has the Ultramarines keyword alongside his Adeptus Astartes one. It looks like that's going to be the system that stops him getting fielded alongside other characters of different stripes. I'd guess that with that second faction keyword it means that you wouldn't be able to take him in an army alongside say things that had the Imperial Fist keyword, or similar ones for other chapters like say Salamanders or Raven Guard. Finally, in his keyword section he still seems to have the keyword monster, as he's a big chunky Primarch. Seems that he's still considered more of a monster than Abaddon the Despoiler is. That'll stop him getting into transports or anything like that, and probably will give him some negative interactions with terrain and ruins and things, having to go around rather than ghost through the walls. Can just be a little bit annoying trying to get him to combat. Moving on to his base stats, Guilliman moves 8 inches, a little bit faster than your standard Space Marine, and the same as he did previously. Looks like he's lost his innate movement buff though, so it might just be a little bit slower getting into melee. He's got a leadership characteristic of 5+, which if anything I'm kind of surprised by just how bad that is. It's the best leadership characteristic that we've seen in the game so far, but still even a Primarch will apparently be failing Battle Shock 1 out of every 6 times that he checks. It's maybe just a little bit worse than I might have expected for the literal commander of the Imperium. If he gets less than half wounds there is at least a reasonable chance that he might take Battle Shock. It looks like he's objective control 4 as well, so that will mean he'd be able to hold his own against small squads of infantry, but maybe not take objectives off troops that easily unless he kills them. Perhaps one of the biggest changes for this datasheet is his toughness characteristics. He really does look pretty immense for a screened character now. You often wouldn't be able to level your heaviest guns on him in the first place, and then when he does get exposed, he's got a profile that's kind of similar to a battle tank. His toughness has increased massively, going all the way up from toughness 6 to toughness 9. Looks like you'd certainly be needing some dedicated anti-tank to bring him down these days. His wounds characteristic has increased from 9 to 10. I'd guess that would probably be pretty maximal for lone operatives that can be screened now, though he has taken a small nerf and his invul save has dropped from a 3+ to a 4+, so perhaps just a little bit less impervious to really high AP fire. With things like melter weapons no longer wounding him on a 3+ though, I feel like he has had a bit of a side grade with durability. Overall I think that this looks really quite solid though. Just on average, if Guilliman was exposed and the opponent was able to focus fire on him, and to take down all of his 10 wounds from a standing start, you need 120 bolt rifle hits on him, 51 assault cannon hits on him, 11 multi-melter hits on him, or 7 of those Gravis las cannon type things that we've seen on the Land Raider and that Ballistus Dreadnought. Realistically, it looks like dedicated anti-tank is going to be the way to go, everything else just looks pretty inefficient. Finally, for toughness, he's also got a decent improvement to the Armour of Fate as well. This is his resurrection mechanic. Previously the rule was that when he died the first time, you roll a dice and on a 4+, he gets up with d6 wounds remaining. That's now received 2 different buffs into 10th edition. It now goes up to a 3+ chance to resurrect, and he gets a full 6 wounds restored, not just d6. Quite nice to have that just a little bit more reliable, and it means there's a very good chance that he's just going to be safe for a phase. Even if you focus fired all your guns on him, that test will be taken at the end of the phase, so he'd get back up after all your shooting is done. Perhaps one of the biggest reasons why often when Ultramarine players wind up losing a game, there's Guilliman left on the board and little else. On the offensive, at shooting, he strikes with the Hand of Dominion. This one's now a 30-inch rapid-fire 2 weapon, 2 attacks base and 2 extra at half range, all of these hitting at strength 6, AP -2 and damage 2. This one I don't think is massively different from before, just a little bit of a side grade once more. It's gained a little bit of range and gained a pip of AP, but previously it was rapid fire 3, so some wins and some losses there I suppose. It is quite a nice general purpose gun though, he should be able to do a little bit of chip damage as he moves up. His combat really is pretty meaty on the other hand though. Listed on his profile are the Emperor's Sword and the Hand of Dominion, basically the option to get more attacks but with lower strength and AP, or just 7 attacks with higher strength, AP and damage. It clearly does look quite like a sweep and strike type profile that we've seen throughout 9th edition. It doesn't look like there's any rules on this datasheet to say that you have to pick between those 2 different profiles. I'd guess it's probably going to be in the 10th edition core rules that for melee attacks you're going to have to pick one of the profiles to fight with. I think it's just kind of unlikely that Guilliman's going up to 21 attacks here. Even without that kind of nonsense though, Guilliman is very strong in combat. If you choose to strike with the Emperor's Sword, then you get 14 attacks at strength 8, AP 3 and damage 2, so pretty optimal for killing things like Space Marine Intercessors or Chaos Marines. And he also gets that devastating wounds rule, the one where you get 6s to wound cause mortal wounds instead of the normal damage. That'd be quite nice against anything with a high invul save. On the other hand, quite literally, we've got the Hand of Dominion. This one's 7 attacks at strength 14, AP 4 and damage 4. This one gets the lethal hits rule as well, so if you get hit rolls of 6 then they auto wound, though admittedly a lot of the time this thing is going to be wounding as strength 14 is massive. Putting that together, it means that it's basically going to be a massive combat threat to anything that he contacts. On average you're looking at about 12 termagants dead with the Emperor's Sword, 8 Space Marine Intercessors, maybe a little bit less optimal into Terminators where he kills 2.7 of them. It works out that the sword is very slightly better than the hand there, but not by much. And against a vehicle with a 3+ save, such as a Rhino or a Repulsor, the Hand of Dominion is pretty rough, does a massive 17 wounds, enough to scrap a Repulsor in a single round of combat if he catches up with one. Overall his melee just looks pretty enormous now, you don't want to get in Guilliman's way. Despite big melee, command abilities are perhaps what Guilliman's really famed for. It seems that in 10th edition though, a lot of standard character reroll auras and things are going away. I kind of expected if anyone was going to retain a standard reroll aura it would probably be Guilliman, but it seems that they've gone away from this. The new incarnation of him no longer has any standard reroll aura. His movement buff is gone as well, which gave you an extra inch of movement and charge, and he no longer gives you extra CP for being the Warlord it would seem. What you do get is his Author of the Codex special rule, which admittedly is pretty immense. In a trend that we've seen on a few other characters, it looks like Guilliman gets to choose with 3 different rules in your command phase, and then these rules continue to take effect until your next one. The first one, the Primarch of the 13th one, sounds like it's a bit underwhelming, to be honest. This one's a 6-inch aura of +1 objective control and reroll leadership tests for nearby units. I guess potentially this one could be useful enough if you do really need to just hold an objective on the last turn. Maybe it could be one to flip through if the stratagems or the damage isn't going to be useful, and literally Guilliman and a squad just wants to survive on an objective and hold it against an impending threat. Still though, I think that this one will be rarely played. Then the second one I think is perhaps the biggest and scariest one, called Master of Battle. This one ties in with the Space Marine Oath of Moment rule. Oath of Moment allows you to nominate one unit in the enemy army and your entire army gets full rerolls to hit and wound against it. Guilliman sort of allows you to double dip on this. As well as picking the one units, you get to pick a secondary target too. If your Space Marine army, empowered by all those rerolls, kills your first target, then you get to move on to your second target, and now that one gets all the rerolls against it, 4 rerolls to hit and wound army-wide. This is absolutely massive, to be honest. Oath of Moment is a crazy powerful rule just in itself, particularly if you get to target something big and tough with it. And this potentially still allows you to get enormous rerolls against your secondary target if the Oath of Moment target happens to be something that you can realistically take down this turn. Seems like Guilliman still got it with the reroll capacity, and it looks like there's absolutely no positioning requirement for this. It just applies to your entire army on the battlefield, never mind if they're standing next to the Primarch or not. I feel like I'd usually choose this one as the most reliable value. The last one though does also look very good indeed, and depending on stratagems available to the Space Marines, this one also could be really interesting. This one's called Supreme Strategist, and it basically allows you some free Adeptus Astartes stratagems within 12 inches, and it looks like the way that it's worded is that you get to do one of these per turn, not per battle round, so that would imply one in your own turn and one in the enemy turn, if that makes sense. We've already seen one rather good Space Marine stratagem that can take effect in the enemy turn, that Armour of Contempt one that gives you +1 to your saves. I guess it could probably be helpful for some things just like the command reroll if you wanted that. And we've yet to see the full list of stratagems, either the core ones or the Space Marine ones, so there might well be some other very good stuff. This one really does look kinda mad as well, compared with the way that 10th edition works. 10th edition looks like it's going to greatly strain your CP. Only getting 1 in each command phase and not starting with any whatsoever, this one could effectively double the command points that you have to spend over the course of the game. That does seem absolutely massive, to be honest, though I feel like it's going to be hard to weigh up against just enormous rerolls targeting a secondary enemy target each turn. Both of the second and the third rules I think seem pretty awesome. Overall, points dependent, I can't help but think that this Guilliman datasheet looks really quite solid. Decent toughness, massive melee, and 2 thoroughly excellent command abilities. Seems like it'd be hard to go too far wrong. Beyond the datasheet though, we do already know a few other synergies that we could use with Guilliman. He's going to be relevant for both the Space Marine faction rules, Oath of Moment and combat doctrines. Oath of Moment is going to be pretty relevant for his own damage output. In particular, it works great with the Emperor's Sword. 4 rerolls to wounds plus mortal wounds on 6s is a really strong combo. Could be really awesome against tough stuff with high invuls. Combat Doctrine seems nice on him as well. That would allow him to advance and shoot early on with a Devastator one. Could be nice not having to compromise between shooting and getting where he needs to be. And advance and charge is pretty obvious on him. It's really quite nice on sort of slowish movement units like this that have immense melee power. For stratagems for him, we've seen a few examples from the Space Marine ones. I'm sure he'll be a great user of any command rerolls for big damage, saves, or charges. It does look like that if you choose the stratagem option out of his buffs, you will be able to get those free stratagems on Guilliman himself if you wanted to. He does seem a pretty reasonable target for the other 2 buffs that we've seen for Space Marines as well. In the Gladius Strike Force, a +1 to his armor save could be good against AP-1 or AP2. And that 2 command point fights on death one is pricey, but if you're pretty certain that he is going to get wiped out, then that could be a stack load of damage. He's definitely a focal character that you could probably justify command point spend on, even if they're more limited. Finally, I think that he will be needing some bodyguards to get him around the board. With that great melee and command abilities, I think that he's going to be costed at least fairly expensively. I'm going to guess that even though his defensive profile looks pretty solid, it's not actually going to be working out as super tough, not for the points you'll likely be paying for him. I don't think he's going to want to be exposed to all the enemy's anti-tank guns. I guess ideally something durable to escort him would be quite nice from the Space Marine Codex, we'll have to see what works out as tough for the cost once we get the full rules. Something like some Blade Guard veterans, or maybe even the new Terminators, could be interesting enough though, I suppose. It is a bit of a mentality flip to think that he's not going to be buffing those as he's walking up with them, at least not in terms of direct aura rerolls. Overall though, I must admit my initial impressions of Guilliman is that he looks really quite solid. We'll have to weigh him up how strong he is when we get the points cost and some details of what other Space Marine characters could do. Hopefully they manage to make him somewhat efficient. I think he's certainly going to be interesting for bigger Space Marine armies. That second oath rule has army-wide consequences, and it could definitely justify him a higher price tag, even if his combat damage abilities weren't quite as strong as this. Depending on what other points we get, I wouldn't be too surprised to see him at somewhere between 300 and 400. In game, he does strike me as someone that you don't really want getting killed too early, maybe wanting to play at least somewhat safe with his life for the first 2 or 3 turns, perhaps just trying to engage units that he's not going to get immediately killed back by. Maybe a turn or two of playing a little bit cagey, then move towards the midfield objectives with an escort, and put that Emperor's Sword to good use purging the heretics. With the monster keyword, it looks like you still need to consider movement lanes, going around terrain and things. He might be just a little bit harder to make melee, given that he lost his movement and charge buff. Overall though, pretty cool stats for the Primarch of the Ultramarines. Let me know your thoughts on the datasheet down in the comments below. Would you be tempted to put Roboute Guilliman on the table? If you've enjoyed the video and you'd like to see more like this, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description below if you'd like to help support. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.